CodeX group meeting. We have a beautiful rainy day at Stanford and three great presentations from Jason Morris from Lemma Legal Consulting, from John Tinsley of Iconic Translation Machines, and from Jiaro Liu of BCE.io. And so I think we are in for a treat. I think we have three amazing presentations coming up. But as I always do, I wanted to see if anyone had any kind of updates or news to share with the group. Perhaps I'll go first. We have in how much? 4 weeks? No, 5 weeks is our CodeX Future Law Conference. It's coming together nicely. We've just confirmed our keynote. Dharmishta Root, who's the head of Code for America, I believe, and also affiliated with Singularity University, will be our keynote. But still have a few other invitations out for our closing keynote. But we have an amazing lineup of speakers and great topics, and so quite excited. And a lot of people have signed up already. So hopefully you can join us. Please sign up at codexfuturelaw.com. And that's all I have. Next week we have actually the general counsel of LexisNexis come give us a talk at Stanford
on Wednesday the 6th. Yeah. So for our CodeX speaker series, we have a meeting on Wednesday the 6th. So that'll be in the other building. It will be offered remotely, so you can register for that event on our website. So join us for that, and then of course, and so there won't be a weekly meeting tomorrow, next week, but there will be one on March 14th, and then we have Future Law on April 4th.
All right, great. So yeah, so also come and join us for the lunch speaker next week. We'll have pizza or something else.
Right.
And I'm sure a great presentation from the GC of Lexis. And so anyone else, any updates?
Glad to say that World University and School attended its workshop, day-long workshop with the State of California's Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education, a very first step to becoming accredited for online MIT OpenCourseware-centric degrees, eventually law degrees as well.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to be offering a pop-out course in the D School in the spring on reimagining post-disaster finance. So Paradise, California, wildfires, we're going to get bank regulators, bankers, and first responders and community victims of the wildfires together to, over 4 weeks, reimagine a better way to negotiate the redesign of the mortgages that have to be canceled, but also the mortgages that need to be made to rebuild that community.
Cool. What day and time is that?
This will be Fridays through every Friday through April.
Great.
4 Fridays. And then secondarily, as some of you know, I've been pushing forward to create a commodities exchange for outer space, bandwidth launch, etc., which would invoke some of the smart contracts provisions that we talk about. And I'll be in DC with that again next week for all kinds of purposes. And if you care about outer space beyond Star Wars movies and the cover of a Star is Born movie, then I'm happy to talk to you about space finance.
Great. And Roland, our registration for the legal informatics course is open now, right?
That's right. So registration for the legal informatics course is open. Please, if you're a student, please register. Also starting first week of April. And that's a great class too if you're interested in bringing technology to solve legal problems. And final announcement: we also our former student and also legal tech entrepreneur Maxine Minter. She and I were putting on a pop-up course this weekend on legal entrepreneurship at the law school. So we have a lot of great people come in and join us for that too.
Terrific.
All right, so with that, and folks online, if you have updates or questions, you have to unmute yourself so we can hear you, or you have to use the chat function in Zoom. Okay, so let's turn it over to our first speaker, Jason Morris who will talk about his DocAssemble project. Jason, are you there?
I am. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes. Hey.
Okay. I apologize.
Good to see you.
Thank you, you too. I apologize for the background noise on my microphone. I'm actually doing this presentation from a pizza restaurant in a small town in Alberta on my phone. So
okay, well,
Great bandwidth.
that's yeah.
Yeah. Jason, do you have any slides for us today or no?
I sure do. Let me just get the screen share, which until half an hour ago I didn't even know was possible on a phone.
All right.
Yes,
Hey,
those on
great.
the phone too.
Yeah.
All right, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. So as mentioned, my name is Jason Morris. I am a lawyer in Alberta, Canada. I'm also a part-time master's student at the University of Alberta, taking a joint program between the Faculty of Law and the Department of Computing Science, which I affectionately refer to as an LLM in computational law. And for the last 3 months of last year, I was the American Bar Association Innovation Fellow. And my project for the fellowship was DocAssemble Open LCDR, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. So I come to the topic of law and computer programming from an access to justice perspective, and I'm motivated by ways of finding ways to increase the number and types of legal services we can automate in order to provide access to more people. So if I can get it forward here, there we go. So we don't see a lot of automation of legal services in the industry. We've had expert systems around for about 40 years. And when I say expert systems, it's kind of it's an overloaded term. I'm referring to technologies that use declarative logic programming, like Prolog, but which today are typically used for doing things like web interviews. And we've had those around for quite some time. They have not been widely adopted. We also have machine learning, which is very exciting for people right now and is able to answer open textured legal issues like or make predictions about open textured legal issues, like whether or not something is reasonable. It's able to give you a prediction and do so quite accurately, but it's not able to explain or justify that prediction. Expert systems, essentially, it's so difficult to try and get them to make those kinds of predictions that no one bothers to try anymore. So we need something that checks off all of these boxes because there's just so many open textured legal issues that the vast majority of legal services can't be automated unless we have a way of automating this. So in the course of my LLM, I was assigned this text, Artificial Intelligence and Legal Analytics by Dr. Ashley, which I highly recommend. And in it, I learned about a category of tool that I had not heard about before called case-based legal reasoning. There's a number of different versions of this. The one that I'm talking about today was actually developed by Dr. Ashley and Dr. Bruninghouse and was published in 2009, and it's called issue-based prediction. Case-based case-based legal reasoning, it has both of those boxes checked off, but unfortunately it's missing a third, which is to say that it doesn't actually exist anywhere. It's a technology that has been written about for at least 10 years, but when I first learned about it about a year ago, I couldn't find a commercial or open source version of this anywhere that I could actually try and play with and learn about. So I wrote Dr. Ashley about that, and he wrote Matthias Grabmaier about that. And in March of last year, Dr. Grabmaier released as open source a tool that he called Open LCDR for legal case-based reasoning. As soon as that happened, I got in touch with the American Bar Association, and I proposed, as an innovation fellowship project, to spend some time trying to combine Open LCDR with the open source interview and document assembly tool written by Jonathan Pyle, who I think is on the call today, called DocAssemble. And DocAssemble is a very big deal right now in automating legal services, particularly in the pro bono sector in the United States. The American Bar Association listed 20 top web tools of 2018, and of those, DocAssemble was one, and 2 of the others were built in DocAssemble. So the plan was to see if I could make it so that you could generate a DocAssemble interview and use OpenLCPR inside it. The specific objectives, there was 5 different things I was trying to do. Basically make it possible to do this at all. But then also I wanted to have a user-friendly interface that a person with the technical competence of an average lawyer would be able to use for building reasoners that use the IBP algorithm for making these predictions. So I wanted to build a tool to allow people to build their own reasoners. Then I wanted to eat my own dog food and actually build a reasoner in that tool that answers an open textured legal question in an access to justice realm. And then I wanted to, again, eat my own dog food and implement that reasoner in a client-facing interview. I also obtained a sponsorship from Clio, which is a legal practice management company that I'm actually a customer of. And because of their sponsorship, I was able to expand the goals to include the ability to integrate DocAssemble and case-based legal reasoning with Clio so that you could use the cases in your in-house database of clients as data to predict other test cases against. So that was the plan. The specific tool that I decided to build is a website that would answer the question for you, are you in a common law relationship in the province of Alberta? The province of Alberta has legislated the rules around common law relationships, and in that legislation, there's only one really significant open textured question, and that is whether or not the parties are in what's called a relationship of interdependence. So the plan was build this software, build a reasoner in it that's capable of answering the question, predicting whether or not 2 people are in a relationship of interdependence, and then use that reasoner to build a website that would answer whether or not people are in a common law relationship. So that was the goal. The short version of what happened is that it worked. This is an example of the output that the tool generated, and that is the GitHub link for the open source version that includes this demonstration interview, and also includes links to a live demo that you can click on and try it yourself. It's kind of hard to see, the text is very small, but those rows at the bottom are a tree structure explanation of how the reasoner came to its prediction that this particular open textured legal issue was satisfied. And if you wanted the details, you could drill down as far down the tree as you wanted to go. And that GitHub page has links to actually 5 different demonstration interviews. So you can actually try the database. You can try the database tester, and you can also try the integration with Clio. So in terms of outcomes, because I had a limited amount of time, I started out with a database of about 50 decided cases in Alberta. After reviewing those cases and removing things that were either inappropriate for one of any number of reasons, I ended up with 28 useful cases. And then I did leave one out testing. So I had the reasoner attempt to predict the outcome of all 28 of those cases based on what it knew about the other 27. When it did that, it was able to make predictions with regard to 24 of the cases, which is a coverage of 86%. And of the 24 cases that it predicted 22 correctly with accuracy of 92. It had 1 false positive, 1 false negative, so it was discerning between the 2 different sides. This is obviously a very small data set, not generalizable numbers, but it is worth noting that 92% accuracy is exactly the same number that Dr. Ashley had when he first published it nearly 10 years ago. The whole process of building the reasoner took less than a week. And that is basically it for me. I wanted to make sure there was time for people to ask questions. So that's my contact information, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
That's very cool. And I should actually, I have to correct myself. I said you're presenting the Doc Assemble project. Obviously, that's Jonathan Pyle who developed Doc Assemble, and then you basically brought this case-based reasoning approach on top of that. So I think that's a really cool innovation. Any questions from folks here in the group or anyone online? Again, you can use the chat function if you want to.
So Jason, it's Bruce Gahan. I'm really excited about this. I'm wondering, how would you automate the week's worth of work you took to build the reasoner?
I mean, I was using some very low tech techniques for doing the research that went into it. The fact that nearly half of the cases that I originally pulled up in my database were not relevant to the ultimate decision means that I could have done a lot less work if I had been using something like ROS. There's a lot of advantages to be gained there. The more interesting question in terms of how to deal with that research task is not actually at the point of building the database, but rather at the point of maintaining it. Because once you've had the lawyer or subject matter expert go through the process of categorizing cases as useful or not useful, now you've got a database that you can use to train a machine learning tool to do that same task with regard to new decided cases. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of opportunity to make that development process less time intensive. But more than that, I think there's even greater opportunity to make the maintenance of this kind of database very, very automated. And it would be a matter of whoever was responsible for maintaining it would have a system that was occasionally emailing them the cases and saying, should I add this?
Thank you.
So it seems to me that this is sort of like a first kind of test case for you for bringing case-based reasoning into this sort of expanding expert systems with case-based reasoning. What's next on your list? It's a good question. So the basic thesis that I'm working on at the LLM is this idea that these technologies have a great deal of potential that has been unrealized, primarily because they have not been appified. They exist as programming languages, and programming languages have not been something that that people have traditionally thought lawyers should be learning. So my thesis here, my idea is, if we could take these technologies and do for declarative logic-based programming what electronic spreadsheets did for math, and turn it into an application that was relatively straightforward to learn and that immediately demonstrated its value as a tool, that we would no longer have a debate about whether or not lawyers should be coding. In the same way that no one has debated whether or not accountants should be coding, everyone agrees that accountants should be using spreadsheets, which is a declarative programming language for math. So that goes in a lot of different directions. I would like to be able to expand the DocAssemble OpenLCDR to make some improvements in terms of how it matches the workflow that you actually have to go through in designing the database. But I also have some other ideas about making declarative logic programming more accessible. So I have a website, which is blawx.com, BLAWX.com, which is a demonstration of a programming environment built with Blockly, which is the Scratch-like visual interface that Google provides, but which generates in the background code in the Flora 2 language, which is the open source version of Ergo AI, which I know they presented to CodeX a couple of years ago about their. So there's a lot of different
irons in the fire right now. I'm waiting to see what gets traction, and then we'll follow that one. But I've got a lot of ideas.
I feel like Professor Genesaret will actually jump into standing ovations now after what you said about spreadsheets and getting lawyers comfortable with coding and declarative programming. But maybe later Matt will give a standing ovation. He gives us, he's very internalized his standing ovation. So, okay.
There's a question,
Susan.
if we have time for an online. So Dustin from Legalese asks, what's the closest thing in machine learning to the model you've built?
I'm going to have to plead ignorance with regard to what exists in machine learning. But I would say it is largely unlike most of the things that are in machine learning. This is nowhere near as complicated as, say, a 3-level neural network with 3 nodes at each level. It's not even nearly that complicated. It's a list of cases, a list of factors, and a tree of issues. And in my thesis, I'm actually arguing that the tree is completely redundant, and we could just get rid of that and go just with straight legal issues. So I think it could be made even simpler.
Yeah, I was reminded of Kara or case text. I mean, that's kind of a stretch, but. Oh.
Are you able to avail your?
Sorry, the way that it is similar to machine learning is that what you have to do to the cases in order to make it work, you similarly have to annotate the cases for factors that do or don't exist in those cases. But that's basically where the similarity ends.
Have you thus far either developed in Canada's 2 official languages, English and French, or are you planning for those remarkable resources? I mean, all this case law would be in French as well in Canada, I would guess.
Yeah, it's something that hasn't even hit the radar yet, but it does, because we are very, very lucky with the Legal Information Institute that we have in Canada being as strong as it is. There's actually a lot of opportunity to directly integrate the interface with the CanLI database itself. And so there's a lot of that you could do there. DocAssemble, I know, also has a lot of functionality in it that allows you to do multilingual stuff. So there's certainly a lot of potential there, but I haven't even looked at it yet.
All right. There's a question from Elizabeth D, who's asking, who do you see ideally facilitating the lawyer's instruction of programming?
Well, me. I'm going to be teaching a course on coding the law at the University of Alberta in the fall at the Faculty of Law. And I honestly don't know. I feel like we don't have yet the tools that are really going to end up being taught to every single law student. They just don't exist yet. Once we have them and we know what they look like, I imagine that they will be a part of the first year how to use database search courses that everyone takes right now. I think that's where it's eventually going to end up, but the tools aren't at the point yet where that's where they belong. So for right now, I think you're looking at small project-based upper-level courses for law students who are interested, and then let's keep working on the technology and make it better.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, actually, we are already running a little bit behind our time. So, Jason, thank you so much for joining us. And,
thank you very much.
People know how to reach you, I guess. If you could maybe use the chat function to put your contact information in there.
Is there a paper describing this? Or?
There's a Medium post. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if you could, Jason, if you could maybe share your contact info and perhaps a link to the Medium post.
Yeah. I can dump it in the chat right now too, if that makes it easier.
That would be great. And then folks can follow up individually. All right, so next up is John from Iconic. John, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. So
Where are you located?
I was going to say, I'm not coming from rainy California or a pizzeria in Alberta. I'm coming from a cold office in Dublin, Ireland.
Also good.
right across the water. So nice to see you all.
Great to see you.
Yeah, so let me get my slides up here and we can kick off. Can you guys all see that now? No.
It may take a minute or two.
There we go. It's loaded now on our end.
Super. So I guess first of all, thanks to Jameson for suggesting that I join your meeting and talk to you guys. So I guess I'm a bit of an outsider from the legal perspective coming in. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about what we do around e-discovery, litigation, and providing machine translation as a software application for that. Just a little bit of background on myself. So machine translation is essentially all that I'm able to do. I have an undergraduate degree.
There must be something else.
No, as you're going to see, it's been a string of things of me trying to find what I can do. It's the Liam Neeson. I've got a very particular set of skills. How can I make a living? But that's as far as the Liam Neeson comparisons go. Anyway. So I have a background. I have an undergraduate degree in computational linguistics, which evolved into a PhD specifically in machine translation that I got from Dublin City University in 2009. After that, I worked for a little bit of time as a consultant on language technology, helping companies adopt things like machine translation, speech technology. And then in 2012, I founded Iconic Translation Machines. So to explain a little bit about what that is, it's a translation and language technology software provider. Essentially, we develop bespoke machine translation solutions for different enterprises in different industries. We're headquartered here in Dublin, where I'm based now, but we have offices in London and Barcelona, but we operate globally because obviously language is a global issue. And we generally work with different types of enterprises, government organizations, service providers, and then particularly for the purpose of this talk with law firms. So to give you a sense of just the type of organizations that we work with, and within the legal industry, that's law firms like you see there in the type likes of Herbert Smith, A&O, and also it's service providers to law firms. And that can be general service providers like the Big Four or specific e-discovery service providers. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in the area of e-discovery and kind of why language is an issue. So this is, I guess, what traditional discovery looked like. So, you're a firm representing your client and the opposition has to hand over a lot of information. And it used to be physical information like this, paper-based, and reviewers had to sift through it to find that smoking gun that was the thing that was going to open up the case. And discovery has evolved into e-discovery as a lot more of this information has become electronic. So instead of boxes of files, we have terabytes of emails and documents. And so in 2018, we were looking at around 22 zettabytes of data that exists. And this is growing at a compound rate to the point where, in 2 years' time, we're going to be looking at nearly double that. And there's a research by Gartner in the last couple of years suggested that by 2020, about 80% of all litigation will have some multilingual component in it. And this is a real problem because the system isn't tooled up to deal with that. And translation is really kind of shoehorned in when it's required. And so kind of what we're talking about doing is trying to make that a little bit more seamless. So to give you an example of what the options are currently at a law firm when dealing with a case, let's use the example of around 30,000 emails in Italian, where the goal is to identify relevant documents or privileged documents which may be important for the case at hand. The main thing we found that was done at the moment was nothing. Firms would try to find if they could act on something in English. Was there something in the English set of documents that they could act on before having to maybe deal with the foreign language documents, which was disturbingly prevalent, we found. The second option then was literally to kind of shout internally, does anyone speak Italian in the firm? Can you give me a hand? I've got some things I need you to read. Again, not what you'd like to hope your expensive law firm was doing. The main approach was basically contracting in speakers of the language. So getting in Italian speaking attorneys who could actually review these emails directly as you would do with English emails. And the last option was obviously then to translate those documents and review them in English. And so there are various pros and cons of those approaches, but just to look at the sense of when multilingual information is involved, there's a massive additional cost, which can be in the orders of millions of dollars. And the most expensive option is the most common option there, which is contracting in foreign speaking attorneys. So the pros and cons of those relative approaches are obvious to some extent, but just looking there at contract reviewers, it's clearly the most effective approach because you're doing the same process, but with speakers of the foreign language, but it's really expensive. It's quite slow because you have to procure those reviewers before actually carrying out the review. And then QA is a challenge because they're typically not people internal to the firm. And so there's a question of how much you can rely on their work. If we look at translating the content, it's even slower because you have to procure translation. You have to translate all the documents, which can take a long time. And then there's still review that needs to be done. So again, that's expensive. It doesn't scale very well, or at least if it does scale, it scales at quite a cost. So when it comes to focus in a little bit more on the translation, what we're implying here is human translation in air quotes, but obviously there are more options than that. So we can consider kind of three types of options. You have your professional human translation, you have free online machine translation, and then you have kind of more professional machine translation software. So obviously with human translation, you're talking about the best quality, but again, like I said, it's slow, it's expensive, it doesn't scale well. Online machine translation is, again, more prevalent than you would like to think in the legal industry, but that's going away mainly due to reasons around security, data confidentiality, and what's actually happening with that information when you send it into the cloud, to the extent that it's really not a viable solution anymore. And then when it comes to kind of more kind of specific professional machine translation solutions, they tick most of the boxes. But there's always a kind of a pervading question around the quality. Is this good enough for what we need it to do? I guess the first point to make is that human translation in this case is probably overkill. It's probably gilding the lily for what we actually need, because we don't need those 30,000 emails to be perfectly translated. As it was described to me by a lawyer friend of mine one time, that at this point, the review process is not an exercise in perfection. It's an exercise in establishing a legally defensible position. And so establishing that position on the basis of a machine translation is increasingly being accepted in courts, which is why machine translation is being more commonly adopted in the field. So just to bust a few myths about machine translation, because these are the common issues that people have with it. The main one is that it's rubbish. It's the output that it produces is garbage. And the reality of the situation is that it's not. When we look at the quality of translation, and particularly of machine translation, we have to look at what is it for. So if we consider performance based on the usability, where usability in this case is, can I determine whether a document is relevant or not from this translation? We find that on average, in 90% of the translations that are produced are fit for that purpose. Where they are not fit for that purpose tends to be because one of two reasons. The main reason, which is one that plagues all kind of areas of legal, is the quality of the source document. So again, if we're dealing with handwritten information or badly scanned PDFs, it's not going to, you're not likely to get an effective translation from that. And the other biggest influencing factor is actually the language, because it's not really a one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to the languages being involved. There's some fluctuation in quality when it comes to languages. So kind of in terms of managing expectations, there are languages at the easier end of the scale where we can, we're probably going to be above that 90% average. The languages like Spanish, French, Portuguese, things like that. But then on the other end of the scale, if you're dealing with a Korean PDF, the average is going to be much lower than 90%. So again, there's a little bit of expectation management around what can be done with machine translation and where it's more likely to give you success. The second one is more around security, the fact that it's not secure. The reality, again, is that it is in most cases. So obviously, if you're using an online tool, like say a Google Translator or a Microsoft Translator, you need to look at what their policies are around handling data, around what the policies are when you use that service, which typically are when you upload something to that service, the data becomes theirs and there's no guarantee about what they might do with it. But if you're using a machine translation service offered by a commercial provider, it's probably going to be fairly locked down, because I haven't met a client who hasn't made us go through a really extensive, laborious information security process in order to make sure they are very clear what we're doing with the data, where it's being stored, if it's being stored, where it's being processed. And on most cloud platforms, you're able to really control that. So particularly in the EU, there's a lot of concern about data leaving, going to the US. So that's often has to be locked down. Obviously, with the impending nervous breakdown of our neighbours in the UK, there's going to be concerns as to whether that constitutes the EU in a month's time. So again, these are concerns, and being able to kind of restrict the flow of data is something that really can be done by most machine translation platforms these days. So I want to run through 6 kind of quick steps that we found are critical in terms of being able to offer machine translation as an effective product for the legal industry, as opposed to just a tool.
And John, you have about 5 minutes or so.
Cool, no worries.
If that's okay, yeah. If you wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions, that'd be great too.
I'll zip through this. So number 1 is the quality of the translation and the fact that it can be adapted for a particular case if needs be. The second thing is that you can detect the language. So in that batch of 30,000 emails, you might not necessarily know it's Italian. You might have more than one language within a document. So being able to actually detect that on the fly is something that needs to be there as well. Again, like I said, information security, being able to lock down the flow of data, being able to deploy it on premise if that's what's required. Being able to scale is something that's really important, because often the volumes are high and the turnaround times are short. One of the most common questions we get asked is, how long is it going to take to translate X, and can you do it any faster? So being able to scale to meet that demand is critical as well. File handling. So, as you can imagine, the opposition is not trying to make the life of the reviewer easy. They're going to hand over documents in all sorts of different formats. So being able to handle that in a robust manner is something that's critical as well. And then lastly, it being an integrated solution. So like I said, these workflows already exist for document review in English. And so being able to integrate into that workflow so that it's as seamless as possible. So you guys might be familiar with the tool called Relativity. They're a company based out of Chicago. It's used by 85% of all law firms who are carrying out e-discovery and litigation. So kind of having basically like a translate button that's integrated in there to make the process as seamless as possible is something that's critical. So I'm going to skip one slide just to go to a case study to show you kind of how this is being used in practice. So worked on a case with an AmLaw 100 firm with their UK office, and they had 60,000 documents in I would say, relatively obscure European language. So they were using a service provider to handle the process, and we were on board as the machine translation provider, and there was a human translation company involved as well. So what the service provider was able to do was build a review team where they had plenty of English resources. So they had 21 English-speaking people on the review team and only 3 people who spoke the foreign language. And so the way the workflow of reviewing all these documents was set up was that everything was machine translated. So all 60,000 foreign documents were machine translated into English. And then the large review team was able to review them in the native language and flag anything that they thought was particularly relevant. Those documents that were flagged as relevant had a second pass review by the smaller foreign speaking team, who now had a more manageable set of documents to be able to review. Ultimately, then anything that they found as relevant or that needed to be produced in court, that was sent out for human translation. But that was a subset. That was a few dozen files out of 60,000 files. So the impact that the machine translation had on the workflow was that it really reduced. It was like a triage of reducing the volume of content that needed to be processed by the people, which is the expensive, repetitive, manual process that takes time and costs a lot of money. So just to wrap up, to say what we're seeing, at least from our perspective, is that machine translation is in the legal technology stack, and it's not going anywhere, because it's often the only practical option, but oftentimes it's the best option as well. And the demand is not going to grow, not going to go away. It's only going to grow as kind of globalization trends continue. But suffice to say, what I didn't mention is that this technology is only getting better. We've had a paradigm shift in the last couple of years from I guess, traditional statistical machine translation to what we call neural machine translation, which is machine translation kind of on the AI wave. So things have gone a lot better in the last, I could say 12 to 18 months, and the trend is only going to continue in that direction. So I'll stop at this point and allow you guys to ask any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you, John. All right. Any questions for John? Anyone online?
Are you using Wikidata lexicographical project in Wikipedia's 300 languages by any chance? Or where does that linguistic resource fit into where you draw your language resources for your machine translation?
Yeah, so we're not using Wikipedia because actually there's quite a range of content available depending on what language you're looking at. So there's obviously a lot of English content, but if you look at an article in English and then go to view the German article, it could be a lot shorter. So we don't actually have what we call parallel data that we need. We draw our resources from everywhere. So there's a lot of publicly available data. If you think about any EU regulations or any UN regulations are published in about 15 to 20 different languages. So that's easy to get. We buy data that exists from data providers. We create our own data. And then in the best cases, our clients can provide us with data as well. So for example, I touched on it, but we worked on a involving a large German automotive firm. There were a lot of particular terms that would occur quite regularly that needed to be translated in specific ways. So they were able to provide us with glossaries and things like that in advance that we can provide to the software to learn so that we can kind of have a higher guarantee that it's going to get those things right.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, John. I just was wondering, is there a reason why you guys focus on e-discovery and not transactional work, or is that just something that you hadn't thought about a lot?
Scale, mainly. So typically so where machine translation has the biggest part to play is at scale. Where kind of the human approaches are less viable. So transactional work is there. So, I mean, we provide that as well. So firms that would use our software would use it for incidental translation. That's actually a slide that I cut out in the interest of time. But the value from a purely commercial perspective is in scale. These, you know, like I said, one of our clients translated about 260,000 pages of Italian documents today. So that's what you're dealing with. And so it does become to some extent transactional within e-discovery because, you know, cases with foreign language might only occur 2 or 3 times a year, but when they do occur, they occur at scale and they have quick turnarounds. And so that's where it fits in best. Outside of e-discovery, so that's kind of why we got into it, because it was a question being asked of us quite a lot, whether we could service these things. And we did. So those 6 steps that I mentioned, we didn't have them in place. So yeah, we had translation, but it wasn't integrated. It couldn't handle all the file formats and we were missing out on opportunities. So we decided to kind of focus on building something that could work out of the box for this particular use case.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, John. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And did you have another question?
No question.
Okay.
Just a round of applause, I guess.
Yeah, a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
John, if you want to type your email into chat so people can be in touch.
Yeah, sure, we'll do.
Okay.
Thanks again, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
All right, and then next we have Giaro.